people go online from the topic, they could decide whether they think they want to take a listen. So this shiur, this particular seminar is called Covenant of Family. And
I think that was
it's actually based on a larger bird's eye view of the book of Genesis of Sefer Bereshit, which we are finishing this Shabbat, God willing.
Right.
And what I'm sharing with you now reflects a central, I would call it theological position that I believe has some merit, and I hope you'll find it of some value. One of the most important concepts in the Torah that you've heard me speak about in the past is the concept of brit, which means covenant. Covenant is a contract, but it's not a contract between two people. It's a contract, and it's a holy contract between God and people. Now, sometimes the covenant is universal. For example, when God creates the world, he purposefully creates an incomplete world. The last word of the creation story, which is so much a mainstay of Jewish theology, is the word lasot, where God says, I purposely created an incomplete, imperfect world, and I leave it for Adam and Adam's descendants. We all come from Adam. Adam, in the beginning, was both male and female. The rib story is a bifurcation into two entities. God says, the world is imperfect and complete. Now you, that means all of us, to this very day, on a universal level, every human being created in the image of God is given the challenge, given the charge to help redeem the world. But in the Torah, there are also specific allusions, and sometimes not just allusions, it's very direct, to a covenant, a contract signed between God and his people. This is a more particularistic covenant, and in the end, the two interface. Whatever our relationship to God, it is ultimately spelling out not only our responsibility to ourselves, but our responsibilities to the larger world. And in theological, religious settings, there is unanimity. I'm sure in the broader Jewish world there isn't, but in the religious, I would say, spiritual, theological realm, I really believe, probably across the denominations, I don't think this is an Orthodox thing, I think there would be agreement that the central covenant given to us as a people occurred at Sinai. And there I draw your attention to Exodus chapter 19, chapter 24. Those are preamble chapters to chapter 20, which includes the 10 Commandments, and a better translation of the Aseret Divrot is the 10 declarations. There is, however, controversy as to what was the precursor covenant. That is to say, at Sinai, we were a people and we came from somewhere. We came from something. And there is controversy. There's a lot of discussion amongst theologians as to what was the foundational covenant which led us to the ultimate covenant when we stood at Sinai as a people. So I'd like to quote for you the position, not quote, but I'd like to present to you the position of two of the most important theological thinkers of the 20th century, Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Kook. And then I'd like to humbly, and I say humbly because these teachers, I never met Rabbi Kook, he died before I was born, the first Rabbi Kook. Rabbi Avram Yitzhak died in 1935. I was born 10 years later. His position, and I'm going to point out why I use the word humbly because he was a giant of giants. Who am I near him? Why I disagree with him, and Rabbi Soloveitchik's position, whom I had the chance to have a lot of contact with amongst thousands of his students, and why I disagree with him, and then I'd like to present what is my position. Rabbi Soloveitchik argues that when we look at the covenant of where we come from, it's found in Genesis chapter 15. It's in chapter 15. I don't need the text for this, but I'll just share it with you. In Tetvav Yudchet, you know, the covenant of the pieces, where Abraham, there's always a symbol of the covenant, and the symbol always represents the essence of the covenant, where Abraham splits animals and he takes fowl, he doesn't split the fowl, and then he walks through the pieces of the animals. And then it says, Bayomahu karat Hashem pritim Avram. On that day, I believe it's chapter 15, sentence 18, in Genesis, where it says that God established a covenant with Abraham. Now, in this covenant, as we say in Talmudic class, let's hold our heads together. In that covenant, God says that built into the covenant, built into the hope of redemption, is suffering. There is no covenant. There is no redemption without one facing challenges and doing what we can to overcome those challenges. And in Genesis, one can't help but notice in sentences 13 and 14 of chapter 15, this surely, if we have it, would be helpful. There, God says the following.
Sorry,
Chapter
Rabbi,
15,
which chapter?
Breshit, chapter 15, sentences 13 and 14.
Right.
Here is what God says. This is a very, very central piece, very esoteric chapter, but very critical. Vayomer la'Avram, and God says to Abraham in chapter 15, sentence 13, Yadoa teda, you shall surely know. And yada, the verb yada is in the Bible, it's the verb of love. Adam yada et Chava ishto. Adam knew his wife Eve. So we're talking about an act of intimacy, and right afterwards it says that she became pregnant. Vayomer la'Avram, God says to Abraham, Yodoa teda, in love I tell you, you shall surely know. Ki ger yihiyeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem. That into the future, God says in sentence 13, your children will be strangers in the land which is not theirs. And in that land, va'avadum, they will be enslaved. Ve'inu otam, and they will be afflicted. Arba me'ot shana, 400 years. Now, although it doesn't say that this is going to be the bondage in Egypt, to the student of the Bible, this, in all probability, points to that experience. In Egypt, we were strangers. In Egypt, we were enslaved. In Egypt, we were inflicted. From the birth of Isaac, it was 400 years. We were enslaved, according to the Bible, 210 years. And then we're told, and this is the Egypt story, V'gam et hagoy asher yavodu, and the nation which has enslaved you, done, I will judge. I will judge that nation, dan anochi. I will judge that nation. And it's interesting, the word anochi, there's an allusion there to the first of the 10 declarations, I am the Lord your God. I will judge them. Va'acharechein, and afterwards, at the conclusion of the freedom, Yitz'u b'rechush gadol, you are going to leave with a great deal of possessions. If I can face everyone, this actually is the paradigm in the Torah for restitution. It's not so simple. The whole concept of survivors and those related to survivors, and now it's Jewish defense agencies, there's probably been a couple $1 billion that has gone to survivors in restitution money. And just as an aside, there was great debate about that. In the early 50s, none other than Menachem Begin rose up and he said that we should not be taking money from Germany. He called it blood money. We don't want the Shoah. We don't want people to sort of wipe away their debt by paying us off. And the person who most believed we should take money from Germany was none other than Ben Gurion. And there were tremendous protests on both sides, right there in front of the old Knesset building. But in the Bible, there seems to be restitution money. This Rabbi Soloveitchik calls, and I'm giving it just a kind of quick look. This Rabbi Soloveitchik identifies as the covenant of Egypt. That is, preceding the covenant at Sinai, preceding that Onochi, there would be a covenant that would be established with the Jewish people in Egypt. And he goes on to explain that this covenant is a covenant of fate, which is forged through the Jewish people's suffering. Egypt was the place where we suffered. And then he defines fate. Fate signifies in the life of the nation an existence of compulsion. One can argue, why were we in Egypt for so many years? And we could offer all kinds of reasons why we were enslaved. But the truth of the matter is, fate, that's an area of life over which we have no control. That's a time in life where whatever is occurring, we're passive. Our lives are then more influenced. We are more influenced than influential. We're more passive than active. In simple terms, even if a Jew, I'm now broadening this out, even if a Jew doesn't wish to identify as a Jew, the covenant of faith, the covenant of Egypt argues that we will be so labeled by the enemy. For the anti-Semite, there is no distinction between the observant and the less observant. Go back 80 years to the Shoah. Otoa ish yimach shemo, Hitler yimach shemo. He didn't care if a Jew kept Shabbat or not. He didn't care if a Jew kept Kanat. If you were a Jew, and he defined the Jewishness, his definition was not a religious legal, it was not a halachic definition. He didn't know anything about that. He said, if one of your grandparents are Jewish, you are a Jew, and you can't be rid of that identity. So for him, for such an enemy of Israel, there is no distinction between levels of religiosity. Such divisions are irrelevant. What counts is that you're a Jew. If so, you're the enemy. This commonality equalizes and unites all Jews. So what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying is, yes, ultimately we stood at Sinai and we proactively received the Aser Tadibrot. We heard the voice of God, I'm the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt. But, if you will, the predecessor to this covenant of Sinai was the covenant, the Brit Mitzrayim in Egypt. When we were not yet a people, but we were a loose kind of family, we were becoming a people. And our identity was defined not so much by anything we did, but by the way we were viewed by the enemy. If the enemy sees us as a Jew, whatever our level of commitment, we're a Jew. That's the position of Rabbi Soloveitchik. That is, there's the covenant in Shemot, in Exodus, chapter 19, 20, 24. That is the covenant of Sinai. That's the proactive covenant. And we come from, if you will, a covenant which is a non-proactive covenant. It's a covenant that we back into our Judaism. We're identified as Jews, not by anything that we do, but simply by what our identity. And there are Jews today who feel nothing about their Judaism, but when they feel that they are victimized because they are Jew, there's a certain spark, then they understand that they're Jewish. Before I indicate what my problem is with Rabbi Soloveitchik's position, I want to jump to Rabbi Kook's position, which is even more problematic. Rabbi Kook argues that he actually says it straight out, that's separate from the covenant in Exodus and Shemot, the covenant of Sinai. In Genesis, there is the covenant of family, and he says, this is the Brit Avot, I would add Imahu. It's the covenant with the patriarchs and matriarchs. It's chapter 15. And his language is that God chooses Abraham and ultimately Sarah, because Sarah's part of this. If it were only Abraham, Ishmael could be the second patriarch and not Isaac. God chooses Abraham and Sarah because there is something intrinsically superior to Abraham and Sarah, which makes them worthy of being matriarch, the first matriarch and patriarch. In other words, the precursor to Sinai, the foundational covenant, stems from an inner soulful superiority intrinsic to Jews, which he calls the covenant of the patriarchs. I would add covenant of the matriarchs. And that is established in the covenant of the pieces. Brit Avot, says Rabbi Cook, and now I'm giving you an exact translation, is the higher soulfulness that Jews possess. And this position of higher soulfulness is one that traces itself through history. It goes all the way back, I would say, in more modern times, the last 1,000 years, more modern times, to Rabbi Judah Halevi. Judah Halevi said that there's a hierarchy of 5 levels of existence in the world. The lowest is the inanimate. Then there is vegetation. Then there is the animate world. Then there is the human being, the medaber. And above the human being, the Kuzari says, Rabbi Judah Halevi says, there is the Jew. Somehow the Jew is higher. And 100, 200 years later, the Maharal Prague had that position. It was the position of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. It is still a position of Hasidei Lubavitch. An honest Hasid of Lubavitch will tell you, you can see it in the first few chapters of the Baal HaTanya. The Lubavitcher's Rebbe is his great book on Hasidus. It's really the foundation to understand what Hasidic thought is all about. He talks about the higher plane of the Jewish soul, and that was Rabbi Cook. Rabbi Cook, I kind of hesitate to say this, but, and this is why I find this position problematic, was a little bit of a racist. What do you mean? You're born holier than others, an innate spiritual superiority? No, he wasn't a complete racist, because obviously anyone could convert to becoming a Jew. And by the way, having said that, Rabbi Cook is complicated because he was a nationalist to the nationalist power. But no one, I say this with great emotion, no one wrote and spoke more beautifully and poetically and strongly about the universal dimension, our obligation to the larger world, and universal holiness than Rabbi Cook. He's hard to pin down. But this particular piece where he talks about how the Jewish soul is above, that for me is very difficult. Why do I have problems with each? And I write in Torat Ahavah, these 2 brilliant saintly rabbis are my revered teachers, and yet I struggle with both their positions. Rooting covenant in suffering, that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. He roots the foundation of Brit Sinai, of the covenant Sinai. He roots it in what he calls it in Kodo Didofek, in Fate and Destiny. He calls it the covenant of Egypt. Rooting that foundational covenant in suffering poses that the danger that Judaism will be misunderstood as primarily reactive, focused on victimhood, fighting forces with which we're wishing to annihilate us. Now, that's precisely why I think there was a second covenant, the covenant at Sinai, which is not a reactive covenant. That is a proactive covenant. In the reactive covenant, we are coming from the tyranny from Egypt. In the proactive covenant, we're not just coming from, we are moving towards, we're accepting, we're embracing Sinai. I hear that. And for Rabbi Soloveitchik, it would not be enough that we be reactive. Still, that our foundation, the seeds of our covenant, should be identified as reactive. I find that problematic. Again, I'm couching it and saying that I understand fully that even he was troubled by it. That's why he's moving from the reactive Egypt, where we had no choice, we were in Egypt, that was our fate, to the proactive Sinaitic covenant. But any discussion theologically that the seeds that are important to establish this first covenant is reactive, that I'm around to fight anti-Semitism, that's how I define my Judaism, that's problematic. Towards the end of Edgar Bronfman's life, I became very close with him. I have a whole history with the late Edgar Bronfman. In 1985, we were both in Geneva raising a voice at the first Reagan-Gorbachev summit. They had gathered and we were raising a voice for the freedom of Soviet Jews. And at that summit, there was a big press conference with Edgar. And I think I've told you the story where I had fake credentials, which I got from the Jewish press. And I got into the press conference and he called on me. And I said to him, Edgar, Mr. Bronfman, you're the owner of Seagram, a lot of whiskey. How much whiskey do you sell to the Soviet Union? And my argument was he was too soft with the Soviets. We needed to be tougher with the Soviet Union. And that's why he was not interested in, I don't want to bore you with this, with the old Jackson-Vanik Amendment. He was so upset with me. Smoke was coming out of his ears. He says, how dare you? I'm not making any money from the Soviets. That was the scene. About 15 years later, after I started, this is an anecdote, just as an aside, when I started Chovevei and I needed a lot of financial help. So my dear friend, Richard Joe, who was then the CEO at Hillel International, so he was close to Edgar. And I said, Richard, could you arrange a meeting with myself and Edgar? And he did arrange it. And I'm waiting for him to come out of his office to greet us. And he comes out. And as he's coming out, I say to Richard, he's not going to remember that incident when I accused him of selling out the Jewish people. He comes in, I jump up as usual. I try to hug him. He looks at me and he says very colorfully, you effing F. You accused me of selling out Soviet Jewry. And I said to him, Edgar, it must have been a pretty powerful demonstration for you to remember the words of one person 15, 20 years later. That's quite something. But it was a testimony to our friendship that ultimately we became very, very close. He once said to me, he said, the reason I wasn't upset with you is deep down is everyone around me was saying yes. And you stood up and you said no. My power was never, ever challenged. And here you were. And I appreciate that. And he once told me that when I'm back to my point. I'm sorry for the anecdote, stray off course. He once said to me that when he became president of the World Jewish Congress, which fights anti-Semitism, as you know, he said to me, I went to see Rabbi Soloveitchik before I started. I wanted his blessing. I said, what, Edgar? He says, yes, I wanted his blessing. I said, well, did you learn anything from Rabbi Soloveitchik? And he said, yeah, I'll never forget what Rabbi Soloveitchik told me. He told me, Mr. Bronfman, just remember, you were not born a Jew only to fight anti-Semitism. That's deep stuff. You were not born a Jew only to fight anti-Semitism. So this is Rabbi Soloveitchik himself saying that. He certainly was not going to be satisfied with a preliminary foundational reactive covenant, but still, it just being that covenant for me is somewhat problematic. And as far as the theory of superiority of Rabbi Kook, this flies in the face of what I believe is the Torah's primary teaching, and that is that all human beings are of equal value. What makes the human being distinct is that we were all created in the image of God. And the image of God in the Torah was not placed in the first Jewish man or the first Jewish woman. It was faced by Yivra Elokim et Adam b'tzalmo. God placed the first image of God into Adam, from whom Eve, from whom the whole world came, teaching the equality of value of all. We may believe that our system of ethical monotheism, the Torah, the blueprint, whatever, is a better system. That's okay. We're not the only ones who believe that our system is the best. Speak to any Christian, they're going to say, that's stuff from the Old Testament. We're the Brit Chadashah, the new covenant. We believe ours is best. That's very different than thinking that a human being is intrinsically superior. So where are we? We presented the Rabbi Soloveitchik position. Let me even back up further. Where are we? We have the covenant to the Jewish people, which is the covenant at Sinai. But there had to be a preliminary covenant. It just doesn't happen that you become a people. Where do you come from? What's the root? What's the seeds? For Rabbi Soloveitchik, it was the fate of experiencing Egypt together, which brings us loosely closer and closer together. My problem with that is that a covenant should be based on reaction. I struggle with that. Rav Kook says no. What the predecessor covenant was the covenant of Abraham and Sarah are tapped because, again, in Rabbi Kook's words, because they had a higher soulfulness, representative of the Jews possessing this higher soulfulness. So, again, I use for the third time today, because when talking about these giants, that's truly what it is. Baniyut Dati, my humble sense, is the following. The foundational covenant is not Egypt, it's not reactive, that we're united and we identify by whom we're fighting against. And our identity is not at its most basic level that our souls are superior, which I categorically reject. Rather, it is what I call covenant of family. And that too is found in and around the covenant of the pieces in Genesis. In Genesis, in chapter 15, sentence 4, you can put that up too, Shuli. In chapter 15, sentence 4, as the Torah is marching towards the covenant of the pieces, God says to Abraham, these are his
Sorry,
words.
Rabbi, which chapter?
Chapter 15, sentence 4, where God says, Vihi vinei dvar Adonai elav lemor, and behold the words of the Lord to him saying, Lo yirosh chazeh, this one will not inherit you. In other words, there were others in Abraham's home. At that point, it was his steward, Eliezer. He's not going to be the future covenant. Ki im asher yetze mime'echa, rather, a child who comes from your loins, hu yiroshecha, he will inherit you. Now let's keep on the sentence here. Let's keep this up. We can read it again. The word of the Lord came to him in reply, that one shall not be your heir. None but your very own issue will be your heir. Now, God is speaking to Abraham. So in the end, Abraham is going to have more than one child. Here, one would imagine, God is saying to Abraham, wait a minute, you are going to be the father of this family. But there's no indication who will be the mother of this family. And maybe that mother could be Ishmael. But if we now turn to chapter 17, sentence 19, this is where God says, and the mother of the Jewish people, chapter 17, sentence 19, is going to be none other than Sarah. What does God say there? Chapter 17, sentence 19, Vayoma Elohim, and God says, Avol Sarah ishtacha yoledet lecha ben, but Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son. The korota et shmo Yitzchak, and you will call his name Isaac. V'hakimoti et briti ito livrit olam, and the covenant will be established through him as an eternal covenant, lizaro acharav, to his offspring that come after. You can focus on me just for a moment, if I can face everyone. This is what I call the covenant of family. The covenant of the pieces, it's bracketed by God's promise first to Abraham, who'll be the father of the Jewish people, then to Sarah, that she'll be the mother of the Jewish people. And what this is saying is, from this family of Abraham and Sarah, the nation of Israel will be born at Sinai. There, at the covenant established at Sinai, we are given the mandate to be a people of ethical monotheism. But where does it emerge from? It doesn't emerge from Egypt, doesn't emerge from that reactive framework. It doesn't emerge from our superior holiness. It emerges from our sense of family. And as a matter of fact, and this is central to my theology, the book of Genesis, which is in its entirety, it's the lead-in, it's the opening act to the book of Exodus when we become a people, is a book that talks about family. It talks about families that are broken, going from bad to worse to horrific. Judah literally and the brothers try to kill Joseph. The family is divided. But by the time the book ends, the family is together. For the first time, all of the sons, it's a patriarchal book, but for the first time, all of the sons of Jacob are going to be blessed. Before that, of Abraham's son, only one makes it into the covenant. Only Isaac, not Ishmael. Of the sons of Jacob, of the sons of Isaac, only Jacob makes it in, not Esau. Of the sons of Jacob, they're all in the covenant. That's covenant of family. We had come together. And once the family is united, once family is together, then the book of Exodus, the book of our coming into being as a nation, then that comes to the fore, teaching this key lesson. And this is where it's at. Even if there are pieces you didn't follow, this piece is central to me. It teaches that the best model of nation is family. That the covenant at Sinai, this covenant of nation, it's preceded by another covenant. It's preceded by people, individuals who make up a family from whom the nation will come. That is the covenant of nation. You know, a building is as strong as its foundation. A tree is as healthy as its roots. The roots of the nation is the family of Israel, From this perspective, the nation of Israel is also the family of Israel. As Brit Sinai emerges from and remains forever linked to what can be called Brit Mishpacha, covenant of family. And as a loving family, the nation becomes closer than ever, consisting of brothers and sisters, caring, hopefully, this is the dream, unconditionally about each other. Now, ultimately, there's a larger family. In the book of Psalms and Sefer Tehillim, we say it every Friday night, there is Mishpachot Amim. There's the family of all nations. Absolutely. But the family of all nations is broader than another kind of family for the Jewish people. And that is the family of Am Yisrael. And this has been a center of my theology. For me, having the extraordinary gift to have been the rabbi of the Bayit, what a gift. What a gift I didn't deserve, but what a gift. Every day was a gift, just such a gift. But for me, I never looked at the congregation as a congregation alone. For me, I would substitute for the word congregation family. That's why we call the synagogue a bayit. Bayit is a home. In a home, family lives. And that's why I prefer not being called rabbi. I once gave a whole talk on this where I said I prefer being called Avi, Rav Avis. by my first name. We're family. We're family. And for me, when I look at a family, sometimes the head of the family is a father figure, a mother figure, a son figure, a daughter figure. Towards the end of my rabbinate, I was a grandchild figure having something to do with spiritual leadership. With family, and not families that don't work. I remember when presenting this to Synagogue 2000 or 3000, and I said that just as the best motto of the Jewish nation is family, so two pieces of that nation, like our synagogues and congregation, I shared with my colleagues, we're also family. So it was a rabbi raised hand and said, family, my family's crazy. Everyone's arguing. We don't speak to each other. I said, no. I mean a family that works. That's what it's about. Family that works. That's the basic dimension. And to tell you the truth, at the end of Genesis, our family was intact. But when we look at the prophets, what happens? We once again were fragmented. The book of Exodus, and for that matter, the book of Genesis, and for that matter, the whole Torah ends on a pretty strong note. We were together when we marched into Israel to liberate the land. But by the end, we were not in good shape. Certainly at the end of Chronicles of Divrei Hayamim, and that's our challenge. Our challenge today is to go back, and it's the dream of a family together. What a challenge. It's a challenge in the making, not only amongst Jews in America and the diaspora, but of course, this is the great challenge in Israel itself. So B'kitzur, to summarize, for Rabbi Soloveitchik, for everyone who has a theological, religious perspective, the covenant at Sinai is essential. What was the preamble? So Rabbi Soloveitchik would say, Covenant of Egypt. Rabbi Cook would say it was the superior soulfulness of Abraham and Sarah in the book of Genesis. And what we're contributing, hopefully it's a contribution, it's the covenant of family. That's why every time I think about the nation of Israel, I replace the word nation with the noun family. We're not just the nation of Israel. We're not just a congregation in Riverdale. We're a family living in Israel, and all kinds of applications can flow from that definition. I've done much too much talking today, so let's open this up and get your feelings on this.
I see Fern's hand and Estelle's hand and Beverly's hand. Rabbi, could we go Fern, Estelle, Beverly, Ellen?
Do you want me to
Good,
start?
Rabbi? Yeah, Fern, go ahead.
Rabbi, I think what's very important that you mentioned is that we're all family, but I think we have to have somebody like you as the head of the family to set the example for the whole family. And I think that's the gift that keeps on giving is you. You have taught all of us how to be better family members, whether it's, with your real family or your friends who are family or congregants of the family. And I think a lot of it has to come from has come from you, that you've taught us how to behave and how to be with people in a way that others have never reached before. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart to showing us all how to be better people and better family members with one another.
Thank you, Fern, for those kind words. Truth be told, one of the reasons that I stepped back, and it's a while now, officially in 2015, is I felt I couldn't be that person any longer. I felt that I would not do justice to the bayit, and I really do see Rav Stephen as you know, and I'm sure you feel the same way about Rav Stephen, but I do appreciate your kind words. Thank you. Thank you. You mean so much to me, Fern. Thank you.
Avi, I have a question. when you were talking about Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, I would like to know why which you brought out, why did it take God so many chapters in order to declare Sarah as the matriarch? What took him so long? I mean, if he was declaring both Abraham and Sarah as the patriarch and matriarch, why did he wait so long for Sarah?
Right. And he did wait a while for Abraham too.
Why?
It didn't happen. Because part of being chosen is we have to choose as well. Part of being chosen is we have to be worthy. Yes,
So
we're
it took him
chosen.
so many chapters to get to Sarah?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Well, it takes time. It's even look at anything that's worthwhile to be deserving.
No, I mean, he came
deserving
right
of
out
something.
for Abraham. He came right out for Abraham. But why was Abraham more worthy than Sarah I mean, why weren't they at the same time, or why didn't he wait a longer time for Abraham? You're not getting that
Right.
together.
Yeah, that's a fair question. That's a very fair question. And I mean, I think it took time for Abraham to be worthy, but he certainly taps Abraham before Sarah. And I need time to think about that. It's a very fair question. It's often the case in the Bible that the man gets there first, but it deserves a much better answer than that.
Maybe he expected Abraham to include Sarah, and he waited. And Abraham never included Sarah until God insisted.
Well, then you're taking away the decision from God to Abraham. And I thought God was the one who made the decision.
Well, and God did make the decision. He was asking, he was waiting for Abraham to do this. And when he didn't, then God took over.
I don't know.
Look, to even right in the beginning, after Abraham was chosen and they went down to Egypt, and Abraham says to Sarah, "Say you are my sister."
My sister, right.
Well, progeny doesn't come from a sister. In those days, and it's one has to look at it from an historical framework. It's not only that Sarah had to be worthy, but Abraham had to be comfortable with whoever the spouse would be, who would be his counterpoint, who would be the matriarch. I think it took time for Abraham to be comfortable with that. Now you can push back very correctly and say, why is that Abraham's choice? But look, when you go through the Bible and you go through the Talmud, I can stand here and rationalize about treatment of women and say yada, yada, yada. But the fact of the matter is that the Torah is patriarchal, and given the time it was written, it may have been way ahead of its times on the women's issue. But given where we're living now, your question has tremendous, Yeshua Laimladava has, as we say, has tremendous legs. It's a strong question, but bear in mind, one has to go back in history and recognize when all of this is unfolding. The fact that in the end, Sarah becomes a matriarchal figure.
From God's decision.
Yes, but the fact that Sarah was correct in believing that the next generation, the second patriarch, was going to be Isaac, whereas Abraham believed, even after Isaac was born, he thought it would be Ishmael. Sarah got it right. That's quite something. But your question is a better question than whatever I've said. Anyone else, Bev?
I can remember hearing A. Dean Steinsaltz of blessed memory talking at the Y, and he spoke about the Jewish people as family. That no matter what a person decides, when they're born into the family, like them or not like them, they are family. That is your family. And so I wonder if things that he said were an influence on you.
Maybe.
You know,
To be influenced by the
such a-
Steinsaltz is a great honor.
oh,
That's
great.
for sure.
And one other thing that disturbs me, and that is Rav Kook did
Yeah.
not hold women in the same esteem
No.
as men. I don't know. That's an embarrassment. And that's not so long ago.
Right.
That,
Right. He was a radical thinker, but there were pieces of his theology that were not. I mean, he was against women's voting. He was the one who said
Right.
that in the absence of the king, democracy is going to reign in Israel. He died in 35. And whoever is voted as prime minister has the law of being the head of the rulership, the biblical kingdom, which is a big deal in theological thought. But he did say women should not vote. But I'm convinced, were he alive today, he would be in the forefront of insisting that women vote. You know, when I think back to the 19th century, recently I've been reviewing sermons given by rabbis during the Lincoln era, when, of course, Lincoln was fighting for the freedom of the slaves down south. And it's painful to read rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, who defended slavery. It's painful, but I'm looking at their writings from the prism of 2023, and I offer a humble prayer. My prayer is that were I living that way, I would have not been swept away by what was happening during those times, and would not have been one of those rabbis, God forbid, who would promulgate slavery. But you never know. It's not easy to go against the flow. It's not easy at all. So Rav Kook was a dynamic figure. His writing is radical. There's no doubt. Maybe one day I can pinpoint areas where he's just like, whoa. I mean, his universalism, I think there's hardly anyone today who speaks and who writes with a sense of looking at the whole world, the beauty of the whole world, the beauty of all people the way he does. But there was a side of him that was very, very particularistic and nationalistic. And there was a side of him that was a side that said women should not vote. And I think were he alive today, I think he would be a very, very different opinion.
I hope so.
Yeah. And again, I hope that if I were living back then, I would have not been swept away by the culture of those times. It's easy now from the prism of modern society to say, oh, how could it have been that way? Well, it was that way, and blessed is the person who, in the face of the sweep of the times, is able to stand up and say, no, this is slavery is of course wrong. Yes, Vivian.
Rabbi, we have Ellen and then Vivian.
Okay, Ellen.
I don't know. I think that there's a difference, and that's maybe what the confusion is. I don't think the first one is a covenant at all. I think it's a promise. And there's a difference between a promise and a contract. A promise is a one-way street. You know, I promise to make you as fruitful as all the stars in the sky. He didn't say, I'm going to make you great leaders. He didn't say, I'm going to make you good people. He didn't say anything about what those people were going to be. They were just going to be numerous. When you get to Sinai, the contract is both sides have to come to it. Both sides have to give something in a contract. And that's why that,
there's a lot of discussion.
You know, when our children are born, we sort of just
Ellen,
promise we're going to take care of them. You know, we don't ask them to do anything.
Right. I love that. I mean, there are ways, what is a covenant? Is a covenant always bilateral or is it unilateral? You're saying if it's a promise, it's unilateral. It's a one-way commitment. We don't have to do anything in return. God says, no matter what, this is yours. And I think one can look at it that way. It's a one-way deal. So there are aspects, just to try to bring the positions together. The Bible does use the word covenant, even in Genesis. But having said that, there could be a covenant, which is more, as you're saying, more promise. Whereas covenant at Sinai certainly was a two-way. I hope that on some level it makes some sense. But I think what you're saying is those are the right questions to ask y'all. And as in all these discussions, sometimes the questions are always better than the answers. So I thank you. And anyone else? And then I wanted to say one last word was
Yeah. Can I say something?
Vivian, of course, Vivian, yeah. Of course.
I'm thinking about the family and what constitutes a viable, good family. And the first essential part of it is that there be two parents who care for each other, who are concerned for each other, and have similar values and want their children to grow up in a certain way. And I know I can think back throughout Jewish history and throughout biblical references where the parents are always together and they have similar values. They support one another and help one another. This is the essential of the family. And Jews have always followed that model of having two parents who have similar values, get along well, take care of their children, raise them in the covenant, and move on. And there are many other societies where that is not true. I don't want to go into that. And they are not successful. But looking at Jews as a family is so positive and so meaningful that I value that so much.
I appreciate it. And of course, with society being what it is, and I'm a very strong advocate of rights of LGBT and our responsibility to bring in people who are gay. And I've not gotten my hands around trans yet, but certainly on the gay issue, it requires us to constantly define, redefine, what does family mean? There are many marriages that end in divorce, and we're not Catholics. Catholics say no to divorce. The divorce again is part of the Jewish system, even though the rabbis say God collects the tears of the effects of divorce, and God cries with those tears. So yeah, what is a family, and with the evolving family today, how does all of this fit in? But for me, what would be some of the tests of a family? If we're not just a nation, but we are a family that works, I would say a couple of things. Number one, about civil discourse. If we are in a family that works at the Shabbat table and elsewhere, there could be people with different political views, different religious stands. There could be siblings who profoundly disagree on a whole variety of issues, and yet they still love each other. We've mentioned over and over that the test of family love is not how people get along when they agree, but how do family members get along when they disagree. Often it is said, at family tables, don't discuss religion or politics. Okay, but for a family that works, one can discuss religion and politics, but nobody is sitting in judgment of anyone else. Nobody is impugning the motives of someone else. So as family, there's civil discourse. I would say, secondly, families that work are inclusive. It means you don't take older people of the family and you cast them aside and don't care for them. you can look at a family synagogue and you can tell, I think, how it does with that framework by the way it treats older people. Are older people basically segregated from younger people? Or is it an intergenerational type of family? Is it, that was my dream of the Bayit is just like a family, that it's heterogeneous. I'm an Orthodox rabbi, but I never wanted to be a rabbi only of Orthodox Jews. I'm a rabbi of all Jews. It makes no difference. That adjective for me is so secondary. I'm a from Jew, fine. But I'm so proud of all the people who came to our free service and the Jewish Youth Encounter program. They were not just an adjunct to what we were doing. They were central. It was not us and them, but it was we. It's heterogeneous. My teachers, many of my religious teachers are people who don't observe Shabbat. They're my teachers. I tell this to Estelle 100 times over. I tell it to Bev, who teaches me something every day. And I'm, this is not soft stuff. This is really identifies who I am. I think civil discourse means that we're welcoming everyone, no matter limitations. I remember when we started programs for the people with special needs, there was a big outcry in the community. I was receiving calls that we would march through the streets in the 70s, early 70s, with special needs individuals. And I remember getting calls from wonderful people, but not knowing better, they would say, you're marching through the streets, the value of our real estate is going to go down. Going to town committee meetings, and virtually everyone there was opposed to putting up homes for special needs friends, because people were not educated enough. It's not that I was holy and they weren't. They were holy too. They weren't educated to understand that these are individuals who play a major role in our shul. It's not us and them. It's we were together, regardless. Family means regardless of sexual preference. I can use a name because it's public knowledge. Rabbi Martyr, who was a rabbi in our shul, married to Susie. That's Stanley and Ruby's family. Susie is the daughter. They have such beautiful children, and who've taken different lifestyles. And they are parents that do not. They're all welcome. They're all welcome. It's what my son said to me. Dove married late, and when he was in his 30s, thank God has 3 children now with Shandy. So we were talking, and as usual, I was doing what a father does. I was telling him what I thought, and he said, Abba, I was not looking for your advice. I was looking for your validation. I never forgot that. I was not looking for your advice. I was looking for your validation. Family means that everybody's accepted regardless of sexual preferences. When Rav Ezra gave that speech, talking about himself, Mayan, it was one of the best talks I ever heard. I'm so proud that when he was through about binary, non-binary, that he received a standing ovation. I don't think there's another Orthodox synagogue anywhere that would have reacted that way. I'm very proud of that. In fact, I said to Ezra, I've been around for so many years. I've given so many speeches. I never got a standing ovation. You get a standing ovation. Although I did say to him, and Ezra is just, there's only one Ezra, I said, how long did it take you to prepare for this speech? He said, about a year. Sometimes it takes all that time to, So families at work, it involves inclusivity. And I would add, beyond civil discourse and inclusivity, I would use the phraseology of increased responsibility. If I substitute family for nation, then I have an added responsibility. You're not just part of my nation, part of my family. And if you're in my inner family, then I've got to step up to the plate and do something about it. Not just verbalize a care, but I've got to translate that care into action. That's why at the Bayit, that's why, as I mentioned, the Bayit we see as a family. That's why it's called the Bayit. That's why the rabbis don't sit in the front. It's not hierarchical. That's not where the Jews are. That's not where my family is. I want to sit amongst my family. Very different. That was the push of rabbis being called by their first names. If it's rabbi, there's sort of like a barrier between the spiritual leader and congregation. I understand the spiritual leader has a certain model of whatever, but I'm part of the family. That's why I would hug every man and Toby would hug every woman. It's a hug. It's a family. That's why I think people should wear name tags this Shabbat or next Shabbat. Wear name tags. We should all know each other. It all kind of fits into that concept of we're a nation, and if we're part of the nation, we're a shul, but all of that is in the framework of family. Now, I know in my rabbinate, I often came up short. It's a dream, it's an idea, it's an ideal. But that's what Brit Mishpacha is all about. It's the covenant of family. When I used to do traveling, and Toby would say to me, what are you doing? What are you traveling out of the country to this zone or that zone where the Jewish people was under attack? I said, it's not just my people, it's my family. That's what I thought. And sometimes the traveling worked and other times it didn't. Any final thoughts on anyone's part?
Thank you for explaining that so beautifully. It comes right into my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just close by reading the, yes, Judy.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm in defense of Rav Kook, because you said that you differed with him with regard to his idea about spiritual superiority. B'kavod. I don't know if I can agree with that, because suppose I say, my mother and my father were very sweet people. I don't know that that's necessarily thinking that they're better than anybody else, like in a Yamachimum kind of a way. I think it's, it's saying that they preserve the Torah, the bridge of the Torah, and pass that on to from generation to generation. And like you said, it's our responsibility. But I don't see that that's a problem with Rav Kook saying spiritual superiority, that we have the Torah. Hashem gave us the Torah, and it's our responsibility to keep it and to pass it on from generation to generation and to light the world with, what we've learned from the Torah.
No, I think that's said very, very well. And I would distinguish between, one who feels that one's soul is inwardly superior. That is to be distinguished from an understanding that we believe that our Torah, its system of ethics and the way it works, is of a higher order. So it's not our souls that are intrinsically superior, but it's rather our code, our beliefs, our core values, our mission. I think I write about it in Open Orthodoxy. What do I write here? There are some Jewish thinkers who posit that the light, we're supposed to be a light to the nations of the world, may be the Jewish soul, which is innately superior. This is problematic, as it fosters a sense of second-class citizenry for the rest of humanity. Judaism is based on a primary principle that every person is created equal in the image of God. Mainstream belief, Jewish belief, maintains that the light is our mission to bring Torah ethics to the world. Our task is to function as a catalyst in bringing about a redeemed world. The movement is not from the particular to the more particular, but rather from the particular to the universal. Not a statement of superiority, but of responsibility. So the superiority is not, it's not that I'm from minute one of my life, I'm superior. It's that I'm born into a family of where the Torah is our guidelines. And for those who think that too is racist, it makes us superior, I point out that not quite the contrary. I think what attracts me to Judaism, whereas in other faith communities, take, for example, extreme Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, Catholicism. If you don't believe in Jesus, that's it. If you don't believe in Jesus, you really have a problem. Your soul will not be redeemed. That's why the nuns who went to Auschwitz, they were praying for the souls of those who were murdered there. Thank you, but no thank you. That's not where we come from. Judaism is of the opinion that you don't have to believe in the Jewish concept of God. You don't have to believe in every principle of the Torah. There are Hasidei Umot Olam. There are good universal people, and they're of the highest levels. And in that sense, I think Judaism is much more embracing and welcoming of Gentiles than those in other religious frameworks who say it's our way or no way. That's not a Jewish concept. Only in Judaism do we end the Yom Kippur service by saying, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikarei lechol amin, that our house of prayer will be a house of prayer for all nations. Everybody can come to the Western Wall and pray. You know? The other side would say, not everybody can come to the Temple Mount and pray. Why? You say you can pray there. Why can't I pray there? Why? But that's the belief. The belief in Islam is if it's not our way, then it's a desecration. That's not a Jewish concept. You could be Christian, Buddhist, and so on, and you can pray at the Western Wall, and it's and you're welcome. Still, you have the last word, then I must.
I'm just saying, but the Haredim are very strong about women not being able to pray at the Western Wall. They also are one-sided. Not everybody.
I'm so sorry, you're
all inclusive. You know.
Look, this is the big issue. This is why, right? Look, I'm a very strong believer in that everyone should be welcome to pray at the wall, conservative, reform, and frankly, we forget that in the mix there's also those in the Orthodox movement who are much more open, much more inclusive. Even the deal was a deal where reform and conservative could pray at the wall, but there is a growing number of Bayit philosophy of Jews who are Orthodox who may daven with a mechitza but want women's participation, but it should be open to all. I couldn't agree more. Let's stop here. Ezra, how are you doing?
Thank God, I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Good.
Good to see you.
Great, Ezra. It's great to see you, Ezra. I see you're in the Bayit, right?
Oh yeah, it's the place to be.
Right. Are people near you too?
Not yet.
We can't do both.
Today's a rainy day, but I have a goal of helping set up a TV screen in the lobby so that people can come and do your class, even if you're not here, so they can stay on for my class in person. But it's a little bit of a logistical.
I see. Right.
If you want to teach in the Bayit, we can set that up for you, and then unless you're just like your dining room table.
Yeah. We'll see. That's right. Love you. Love everybody. Take care.